Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to Water Tanks, and today I've got a full tank review for you on a brand new Tier 8 American premium medium tank. It is the ASTRON Rex. This vehicle is one of the most bizarre tanks that I have seen go into the game recently, kind of a bit like a back chat at Tier 10, dropping down to Tier 8 and trying to balance it into a Tier 8 American package. The vehicle has a decent amount of armor, it has an auto-loading 105mm caliber gun, and yeah, you guessed it, a horrible weak point on top, but really quite decent hull and turret armor, nice gun depression to go to boot. So the ASTRON Rex. Before we jump into the gameplay, let's see how it sticks its nose into some of the balance of other comparable vehicles. So I'm going to be comparing the ASTRON Rex to the standard Tier 8 American medium tank, the T69, also one of the most meta vehicles in the game, the Borask, definitely a fan favorite, and also a Tier 9 vehicle in the form of the Char Few Tier 4. But keep in mind that the ASTRON Rex is at Tier 8, not at Tier 9 like that reward tank. But as you're going to be seeing, the gun can feel a little bit similar. So immediately we notice that the ASTRON Rex has the best damage per minute in this comparison. At 1920, it actually reloads quite quickly indeed for having such a big magazine. And that's because this vehicle with a 5-round 105mm autoloader can deal 1,600 damage, albeit within 16 seconds of the first shot. And that's because it has a 4-second intra-clip reload, a lot like a Char Few Tier 4, dealing 320 damage per shot. So everyone out there thinking, whoa, is this just going to be a more powerful Borask? No, it's really not. The Borask, from having its double punch regard, where it can deal 360 and then 2 seconds later another 360, allowing it to deal 720 in 2 seconds, the ASTRON Rex is going to do a paltry, at least by comparison, 640 damage in 4 seconds. So if you're thinking this thing is going to be a burst tank, no, it's not. It's a bit like a Bat Champ, a bit like a Char Few Tier 4, taken down another tier to try and balance it out. It takes a long time to be able to deal the damage in this tank, way longer than something like an AMX 5100, for example, which actually has a 6-round 100mm autoloader, which takes 13.64 seconds to deal 1,800 damage. And so with the ASTRON taking 16 seconds, it's clearly a much worse all-in tank than a 5100, a worse brawling, should we say, burst damage dealer than the Borask, and it's significantly worse than the T69, which is dealing 960 damage within 6 seconds. The ASTRON wouldn't have even fired its third shell by that point, requiring 8 seconds to do 960 damage. But the ASTRON has a lot of other great things about the vehicle that kind of make up for the fact that it doesn't burst damage and it doesn't really deliver such a big mag as quickly as other vehicles already in the game at Tier 8. Firstly, that damage per minute. It reloads this big magazine in 34 seconds. That means that it actually reloads its 1,600 damage, which is 40 higher than the Char Few Tier 4 in less time. And so I found when I was playing the ASTRON Rex, it wasn't so punishing to fire 1 shell, 2 shells, 3 shells, and then reload the tank. Sure, you're going to be sitting around much longer than you would do in a Borask with a very short 22 seconds reload in comparison, but 34 still doesn't feel game-breaking like you would do in something like an AMX 50 Foch B, for example. One thing that totally does suck about this tank, however, is the ammo capacity. You only carry 30 rounds in the vehicle, and so that makes it quite annoying that you have 190 penetration. That is not high for a Tier 8 tank in 2021. It's the same as the Borask, and if you load gold with this vehicle, unlike the Borask, which has 240mm of penetration, the ASTRON Rex has 250, just a touch better. But again, you don't really carry enough ammunition in the vehicle to be able to take multiple kinds. Unlike in the Borask, where I'm definitely taking a magazine, 2 shells of high explosive for when I'm really going against those squishy tanks. You just can't do that in the ASTRON Rex, and it does mar into the flexibility of the vehicle. In addition to this, the shell velocity at 945 feels underwhelming, although if you do load the gold with the vehicle, it goes up to 1,181. Definitely not a sniping tank within that regard. So now let's move on to the gun handling, and this is where it's kind of really good news, but also really bad news for the ASTRON Rex. 2 seconds aim time. Wonderful. Magic. You're going to be able to pull in that reticle quickly. But remember, that the vehicle has a 4-second intra-clip reload anyway, and so the aim time didn't really need to be that good. Now, don't get me wrong, I'd rather have better aim time than worse aim time, but considering how long your intra-clip reload is anyway, you've got more than enough time to aim within those 4 seconds. So look at this accuracy, 0.43, one of the worst in the game at tier 8, unless you're using some of the really big derpy guns. That is slightly worse than the Borask. Wargaming are really trying to stop this tank from being a sniper, unlike the Char Future 4. Its gun handling at 0.181 when moving is much worse than the Borask's 0.1. When turning, it's 0.13, which is very interesting that it's different to the moving dispersion, which are usually linked together, as we can see from the other two tanks. And its dispersion when turning the turret is 0.1, which is very nice. Now, its bloom after firing is 4, but that doesn't really matter considering that the vehicle has that 4-second intra-clip reload. The gun depression on the tank is wonderful, however. 10 degrees gives you all of the flexibility that you need to work a ridgeline, but be warned that the tank doesn't have gun depression over the back. Mobility-wise, the ASTRON Rex, I would never call it a fast medium tank, but it's not a slow medium tank. It's limited to 52 kilometers an hour, which, as we can see, it can achieve on hard and medium, although definitely not uphill. But its soft top speed, thanks to TanksGG awesome effective top speed value, is down to 35.3. And that's because while this vehicle does have good ground resistances, as we can see, practically the same as the Borask, which makes up for the vehicle's poor power to weight ratio of 14.52, the Borask has a 25 horsepower to ton ratio, which does make it feel very agile, more like a light tank than a medium tank. Whereas the ASTRON Rex, it's more of a heavy medium tank, I'd say, for 2021 world of tanks. One thing that I do love about this vehicle, however, is it's able to go backwards at 30, a bit like an STB-1, which has a higher reverse speed than all of its counterparts at tier 10. The ASTRON Rex doesn't care whether it's going forwards, doesn't care whether it's going backwards, although I'd like to highlight once again that the lack of gun depression over the back of the tank really holds it back from reversing up to a ridgeline and then powering away. But considering that you can go at 30 is not a bad speed to be able to pull back, and obviously you can pump that up with a turbo as well. One thing I would recommend in this vehicle is trying to maximize the power to weight as much as you possibly can, because 14.52 really made this thing feel sluggish compared to other autoloaders, which quite often just bomb in, perform all the damage, and then get out. This thing feels just a bit slower, a bit like a T69 within that regard. One thing that is wild about this tank, however, is the traverse speed. For some reason, its base traverse speed is currently 60, which is actually too much, I'd say. Once you have all of your crew skills on this tank, you do feel like you overturn in the corners, and I might even go on to show that I take a field mod to reduce that traverse speed so you're not bumping into corners as you're making your way around. Also, the vehicle has a great turret traverse speed of 44, not quite as good as the Borask's amazingly bizarre 55, but still enough to re-engage tanks wherever they are. So now let's talk about the armor. This is where the ASTRON Rex is just truly fabulous, at least compared to vehicles like the Borask and the Char Future 4, which is still a fairly heavily armored medium tank, at least inside a good matchup. The ASTRON Rex has 85mm of frontal hull armor and 70 at the side, 220 on the turret and 100 on the side of the turret, and that makes the Borask, which pretty much gets overmatched by all rounds that hit it, look absolutely useless. But remember, in World of Tanks, it's all about the angling. Just because you have a decent amount of armor doesn't make it effective unless it's well angled, and luckily, yeah, the ASTRON Rex is performing very well with that regard. So you're looking at the live model as if it was getting shot by 190mm of penetration. We can see that the effective turret on the left and the right is 220, very nice for a medium tank. And the upper hull is angled, but not the thickest. But if you use the gun depression of this tank, that upper hull becomes an auto ricochet for everything apart from high explosive anti-tank rounds. The lower plate on this vehicle is actually incredibly troll. For some reason, it's 130mm thick. And so if you can, what you can actually do is over-angle the lower plate of this vehicle, come around a corner and try and bait the enemy into shooting it. And if they do so, they're going to have to get through a very well angled lower plate, And if they're lower tier tanks, they've got about 180 pen like this vehicle has, or 190 pen as this vehicle has, they are going to bounce. It's only really when they start to have about 250 pen that you're not going to be able to do that. But you could, again, just over angle, see if you can maybe make somebody make a mistake and then come round and deliver the auto reloader. Of course, one of the worst things about this tank has to be this huge weak point on top, which is massive. It's hard to miss if you're sitting still. And really with the ASTRON Rex, you want to try and use that great reverse speed and great forward speed to be able to try and go forwards and backwards as much as you can to be able to avoid them hitting your weak point. This vehicle is pretty okay for side scraping around corners as well, because it does have 70mm of side armor, and all round, this is a thickly armored tank for an autoloader, and it's definitely one of the advantages for the ASTRON Rex. To go with this armor, however, 1,300 hit points doesn't really do it for me at tier 8. It's okay, but especially when you get into your tier 9 and tier 10 matchups, your hit points are what's needed to have that very long intra-clip reload time in a 1v1. I quite often found that unlike when I'm fighting in a Borask or other, should we say, burst damage autoloaders, that the enemies don't just shoot me once, they shoot me multiple times before I'm able to unload the magazine. So you better hope that you bounce, or that you catch them ill-prepared, or you just go around, maybe fire 2 shots off and then leave, and don't kind of do an all-in fight because of that very, very long clip unload time. The camo rating on this vehicle, it's not great, but it's not bad. It is slightly better than the T69, although that really feels a bit more like a heavy tank within that regard, but it is massively worse than the Borask. And so if you're expecting to have 30% camo when you were driving around in this tank, that's just not going to happen. One thing that I don't really like about the ASTRON Rex as well is its 390 meters view range. That's not terrible, but it's not good. Not so much that without a very good crew and a premium consumable that you might not be able to use coated optics, but it definitely does hinder the tank compared to some of its competition. Another thing that I really didn't like about the ASTRON Rex is that it has a 3-person crew, which means that if you use your crew from your M48A5 pattern, that the commander doesn't have a dedicated loader, and it doesn't have a dedicated radio operator. What this means is the ASTRON Rex is going to be missing skills like intuition, it's going to be missing skills like adrenaline rush, or even just safe stowage to stop you from getting ammo-racked. The driver and the gunner will work perfectly from your M48A5 pattern, but I actually retrained my commander to have both recon and situational awareness to try and pump up that view range as much as I possibly could. This probably means that you should retrain a new commander specifically for this tank, unless you're willing to go without situational awareness, and that means that you're probably going to end up having to take coated optics on this tank if you do so, as even with my perfect crew and bounty vents, I only get up to 454 meters view range with a premium consumable. So equipment-wise on the ASTRON Rex, I've got a bit of a weird setup here. I'm using a turbo to try and maximize the engine power, and also to boost up that top speed a little bit so it doesn't feel so sluggish. A standard one here, bounty vents to just make everything about the vehicle better. Considering how poor the accuracy was of the vehicle, I actually recommend using a bounty or just a regular aiming device on this tank. For me, this improves my accuracy by 8%. This means that the ASTRON feels a lot better at sniping, and considering how limited the amount of ammunition that you have that's pretty nice to have. And I actually got my accuracy on this vehicle all the way down to 0.34, which doesn't feel terrible. However, I'd like to clarify that this setup you can only probably achieve if you have that special commander with situational awareness and recon, and you're willing to use a premium consumable. Otherwise, your view range is just not going to be high enough. If you're a free-to-play player who doesn't use premium consumables, unlike me on my main account, you're probably going to want to slip in coated optics in this tank to have enough view range. A lot of you might also be thinking, why aren't you using vertical stabilizers on the tank? Well, I feel like because this tank's aim time is so good, you can actually get away with having a bit of bloom. That's definitely going to make the vehicle feel awkward when you want to move and shoot at the same time. But considering how bad the vehicle's intra-clip reload is and how decent the aim time is, I've got it down to 1.74 seconds with my loadout. Unlike on other autoloaders where you want to use vertical stabilizers to stop the reticle from blooming out between your shots, this one has such a long intra-clip reload of 4 seconds that you have enough time to be able to aim the shells back in and be fully accurate even without vertical stabilizers to be able to reduce the bloom of the tank. And accordingly, I felt that the aiming device paid dividends on this vehicle compared to using vertical stabilizers and just trying to have better gun handling. And finally, now that field mods are in the game, let me just give you my advice for what I would be doing with them. So for your first decision at level 2, I would actually take the option that reduces the traverse speed of my tank, but makes it so that either my ammo rack is damaged or my gun is broken, that it's going to work more efficiently, because this vehicle's traverse speed is just almost too good and you ends up being very awkward. Next, on level 4, I would probably take the option that makes my aiming circle better so I can be even more accurate. That's going to make my dispersion a little bit worse, but for all of the reasons why I suggested improving the accuracy of the tank and the long intra-clip reload, that remains the same here. At option 5, I personally would consider having worse reverse speed and suspension repair speed to be able to gain some extra concealment, because with a turbo, the vehicle's already going at 33 kilometers an hour backwards, so what does it really matter going at only 31 backwards and having better concealment throughout? And then finally at slot 6, I don't really feel that there are either good options for this tank, as I personally would prefer to use an aiming device that doesn't work in either of them. But if you don't have bounty vents and you only have regular vents available, then you could take either of these 2 slots and put one of them in them. Anyway, ladies and gents, that's quite enough talk. Let's see what it is capable of on the battlefield. So first up, I want to highlight how the vehicle is going to do in an okay matchup against tier 9 tanks on a big open map like Prokhorovka. Firstly, I wanted to take my time before we have the commander's introduction to see that I have taken 2 ammo loadouts on this vehicle. I have one where I take 15 shells of regular rounds and 15 shells of premium rounds. That's for when I'm playing against my tier 6, 7 and my all tier 8 matchups, because I don't need the extra gold shells. But when I'm playing against higher tier tanks, especially on a map like this where you're probably going to be a little bit inaccurate at decent distances, I'm going to be loading gold right from the get-go, because I see vehicles like the Moisian, the WZ-111-14 and the IS-32. In a vehicle like this, which makes lots of credits, it's a premium tank, you definitely don't want to be bouncing your regular rounds. You're just wasting your credits at that time. And I feel that by loading gold and having the extra 250 millimeters of penetration, not only are you not running out of ammunition later on in the game, you're probably doing more damage. And as you're playing a premium tank, if you have a premium account as well, then you're going to be making credits with or without. This is definitely not going to be a vehicle that I recommend for the free-to-play players out there. I think it's going to be one of those kind of Borask-esque tanks, which does very well in the hands of the gold noobs that like me in this game. Alright, so in this situation you'll see that we've actually made the .43 accuracy of this vehicle kind of okay at decent distances, and that's because of the improved aiming device that we have used on this tank. So I'm trying to reverse into the bush here to see if we can get some vision on the T-54 Mod 1. We're going to have a little bit of a sit here. Should be okay, right? Wrong. The accuracy, not so the accuracy, the camera rating on this tank is definitely not great. You are an American medium tank after all, and you have a big cupola on my tank. I have the camera rating of roughly of a T69. I am not a sleek, sneaky vehicle, even though this kind of looks like a bit of a toy tank. It looks a bit like a T-71, one of the light tanks, right? After all, it definitely doesn't have camera rating like one, so watch out for that. I just love how quickly this thing reverses, but I don't love how quickly I reverse my way into trouble. Well, in this kind of a situation, it's a bit of a kind of like a trick me once, shame on you, trick me twice, shame on me. I just reversed and got spotted in the same bushes. Learn your lesson, Scrubby Baby. Although, you know, definitely wasn't the first game I played in this tank. I played about 10 games in this vehicle and I had some decent rounds throughout. I know what this vehicle is going to be like. I've played the Bat Chat. It's my second most played tank of all time, or maybe my third, or possibly even fourth by now. I know how the Bat Chat plays. I know how the Char Fuchsia 4 plays. And I play the ASTRON Rex a lot like both of those vehicles. And so if you are a great Char Fuchsia 4 player, if you are a great Bat Chatillon player, this might be one of your new favorite tanks. Just unlike the Bat Chat, don't expect it to really burst out the damage in a 1 versus 1 scenario quite so quickly. Remember that the Bat Chat has 5 rounds, a lot like this, but they're 390 damage, and it doesn't have a 4-second intra-clip reload. It has like a 2.75 second intra-clip reload. So excuse me, sorry. Obviously choked at how bad that was. I did that with my fingers. Why did I just say the numbers? What an absolute donkey. Look, as I was saying, don't expect this thing to burst the damage out quickly. It is not a burst tank. It is something that needs to be played calmly and with thought. You need to consider the situation that you're getting into. And you might see, you might have witnessed me there, thinking about going across to the west. At that stage of the battle, I was thinking about going over towards the Lancet, and then I just saw the mother of all lovely opportunities. How can I not enjoy this? The only thing that I don't enjoy about this situation is the fact that I'm firing gold. But I guess maybe the gold round would be helpful there against the T-54 Mod 1. Definitely not necessary against the Borsig. Just this fairly long intra-clip reload, and considering I didn't know what I was going to be shooting at, I didn't quite feel comfortable to fire the standard rounds. But to be able to put 4 rounds out of 5 in there and deal that 1,300 damage or so that we dealt, oh, that feels wonderful in the ASTRON Rex. And that's where this vehicle is absolutely amazing for those long damage dealing engagements, or if you can manage to get your opponents into a 1 versus 1, oh, it just feels absolutely beautiful. Be warned, however, that because of the vehicle's long intra-clip reload, even in a 1 versus 1 situation, your enemies are quite often shooting you multiple times, and so really try to hang on to your hit points, because your hit points are more than your lifeblood in this tank. They're your ability to be able to survive to deal damage to your opponents as well. So we put 1 round into the side of the 111-14, low rolling there so he stays alive. We bounce off his upper hull, even with our 250mm to pen. But luckily, we have the extra one to be able to finish them off. One thing I'd like to highlight is, in the position that I was in against the Borsig there, I felt so confident in the tank because of its armor. It's just such a weird situation there. A lot of you were probably thinking, what, you're just going to sit in front of a Borsig? Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to bounce every single time. But remember, if I'm using a bit of my gun depression on the ridgeline there, this vehicle does feel a lot safer than other autoloaders just sitting in front of things and dealing damage to them. I can imagine that this thing is going to be the absolute bane of tier 6 and tier 7 tanks, because those vehicles are not going to have enough penetration to be able to deal with this thing unless they shoot the weak point on top. But, you know, misses happen. Bad RNG happens. You might get into a situation there where you miss the weak point in your tier 6 or tier 7, and they're most likely not going to miss you. So at the end of the game here, I'm being a bit of a cheap lad, and I'm trying to save some credits and just fire my regular rounds and get a little bit more spotting. And just like that, while we were one of the only 2 tanks that died on my team, we managed to pick up 3 kills and 5,000, over 5,000 combined in this game. This is pretty much the holistic kind of ASTRON Rex game. Use your reasonable amount of mobility to try and spot, but be warned that your camera rating is not fabulous. Try and be there for those all-in engagements, especially this is a fabulous support vehicle, so we're able to support our team on that ridgeline and do very well indeed. And then use your remaining hit points to try and maximize your credit and experience gained towards the latter part of the battle. But let's check out some more situations for the ASTRON Rex so I can really highlight its strengths and also its weaknesses. Alright, so now we're rolling out on steps, and I'm kind of fishing at the start of the battle. I've made my way in towards the middle, seeing if I can try and use some of my view range to maybe catch any tanks out of position, because this vehicle, after all, is a bit of an assassin. When you can deal that 1,600 damage, albeit in 16 seconds of the first shot, if you do catch a tank ill-prepared like this, oh, it just feels so good. The first shot hitting the track of the SU-152, and just like that, 8 seconds after the first shot, we've done enough to be able to take out a tier 7 tank destroyer right at the beginning of the game. Now, they were out of position, they made a mistake, I guess we got lucky with our first shot, a pretty good result there. One thing that's lovely about this tank is, unlike the Batchat, it doesn't really feel so punishing to fire 3 shells and then to reload, because of the vehicle's fairly decent damage per minute and its reload time of 34 seconds. You still got to be a little bit careful, because now I've got to survive, and oh dear, I'm getting rushed by a T-44 with a T-43 and also with a Super Hellcat supporting him there. I'm really hoping I don't low roll these next 2 shells, and oh dear, there we go. I'm going to have to fire at least a couple of times. And now you're noticing that this vehicle's firing time is actually quite long, and it means that while we do shut down the whole of a T-44 there, and we also spot the Super Hellcat, we lost a lot of hit points for it. Other autoloaders would have been able to deal more damage to the T-44 in shorter time, maybe stopping him from being able to get the extra shots in. But the ASTRON Rex, with being able to ricochet the 250 damage and also having a fairly okay amount of hit points, I just felt like we had the longevity for that situation. Although in this scenario it's quite tricky, because I'm just reloading, I want to try and pressure. This game looks like it's already going to be a win because we've up on 5 different tanks. But I'm going to go forwards, and here's the T-43. We'll put our first round in, and oh dear, I actually lose my turret ring? I fire my second shell by only using my turn keys, shooting the T-43 even with a wedge turret, but the T-43 just bundles in. And because I lost those hit points earlier on, by not having the burst damage to be able to get safe and being caught in an all-in situation, I get all-in'd again by a T-43. And I just want to highlight how weird it is that this thing has an autoloader with a 4-second intra-clip reload. And that's because with a vehicle like the Lansen, even using standard equipment, albeit with a premium consumable, I can manage to get a reload of 7.25 seconds. Obviously, 7.25 is longer than 4, but the Lansen doesn't have to spend all of that time reloading the magazine for 30 seconds after you've decided enough is enough, I need to regenerate a full magazine. When we also consider that the Lansen has 208mm of standard penetration, significantly better than the ASTRON Rex, it starts to be a case of blurring the lines where here you have your bursty autoloaders, here you have your single shotguns with regards to how much of a damage they can deal, and then the Astron's kind of in this awkward mid-zone where it doesn't really feel as if it's a bursty, all-in tank. It doesn't have the sustained DPM of other vehicles without autoloaders, and so it really requires the player to look after their hit points to be able to deal damage with them later on in the game.
Let's go.
One of my favorite things, however, about the ASTRON Rex in my play session with the tank is that it does feel like it can be very aggressive getting into a position early. Just feels like it's this sweet spot. You have this 30-second reload at the start of the battle, and then you build up that big old chunk of damage, that 1,600 damage potential. And when you're in a nice matchup like this, and you don't have to deal with tier 9 tanks, that is more than enough to deal with anything in a 1 versus 1 fight. And maybe you're going to be able to ricochet some shells. And this T-44-100 bounces off us, and I know that I'm probably going to be able to reload before they do with a little bit of pressure. Maybe they didn't know what they were getting themselves into, and just like that, we shut down the T-44-100. While I did get some support from my allies, I didn't need support from my allies, at least against the T-44-100. As long as you make all of your shots count, you aim them well, you can take on any tier 8 vehicle in a 1 versus 1 scenario. And to be able to have that extra armor to be able to add to it just feels oh so lovely. And very quickly on in this game, we're already up to 2,600 combined with the spotting against the 2 tank destroyers that we can make in our aggressive plays. And unfortunately, we're seeing the ugly kind of gun handling of this vehicle, even with the improved aiming device, stopping us from being able to engage effectively against the Kampfpanzer at decent distances. But again, the good DPM of this vehicle allows us to reload and to be able to deal with another tier 8. We are just a couple minutes into this game, just under a couple of minutes into this game. We've already managed to pretty much get 3 vehicles out completely, either with our own damage or alternatively with a little bit of spotting. So our first game on Prokhorovka was a Leveslaio's medal for this vehicle. We get 1,345 base, currently enough to get an ace tanker, but it definitely won't be with a few days after this vehicle is released. For our 3,100 damage and our 2,100 spotting, we fired some gold in this game. We spent 69,000 credits on ammunition, but we made 94,000 credits profit when we take into account we were boosting it up with a personal reserve and we were using a premium account as well. In our next game on steps, this time we didn't fire nearly so much with regards to gold rounds, so we make a very decent profit even if we were to take away the 50k, because we penned 10 out of 10 regular shells, and we dealt 2,800 damage, which puts us second on experience and top on damage, but we did die fairly early with a good shutdown from the T-43. 1,026 base experience, only enough to get a second class medal, showing not too much until the vehicle's actually released. And then finally on Malinovka, 1,218 base experience points with 3,000 spotting and 2,700 damage. And again, not many, if any, premium rounds fired in that game gives us 139,000 credits profit. Although that was with a credit booster, so if we take that away, it's still going to be about 80k. And so you're seeing that the ASTRON Rex makes decent profit inside its nice matchups, but its limited ammo loadout, I feel, and also just its really bad penetration on its standard rounds, means that you're going to probably lose credits or just break even in your tier 9 and your tier 10 games. And unlike the Borask, which really can be that assassin which gets into position and then deals those 720 burst, probably before the enemy has had an opportunity to react and readjust their armor, or the fact that the Borask is fast enough to be able to flank them and shoot them in their vulnerable areas, where the ASTRON Rex is significantly slower, this vehicle really requires more gold compared to a Borask. And so all in all, the ASTRON Rex, an absolute bizarre kind of tank. It feels a lot like a Char Future 4 or a Batchat. So if you enjoy that kind of gameplay, maybe this one will be the one for you. But there are still enough things about this tank that really frustrate me. That long intra-clip reload for not the highest kind of alpha damage, even though 320 is by no means bad at tier 8. The weak point on top means that you can't really use this thing as a hull down lord. The limited ammunition loadout and the fact that it's really annoying to only have a 3-person crew and to have a dedicated commander means that I wouldn't recommend just picking this vehicle up willy-nilly unless you are interested in playing it a significant amount. And I think that if you do, it will reward a player who figures out how it works on the battlefield. I can imagine it being a very powerful tier 8 premium tank indeed. Overpowered? It's tough. It's really hard for me to say these days because with a vehicle like the Borask, I thought that its horrible armor, 3.5 seconds of aim time, and bad accuracy was going to hold it back, and it didn't really do that. This vehicle, on the other hand, has good armor, the same bad accuracy, and really good aim time that kind of makes up for some of the areas where the Borask is a little bit stronger, but definitely doesn't make up for the fact that a 2-round burst damage gun just seems so effective in a lot of the engagements in World of Tanks. And while I feel like in those really long-winded games which do allow you to reload for the larger amounts of time in the ASTRON Rex and be able to get more one-on-one engagements, this vehicle could be absolutely devastating. I think for the most part, those 2-round autoloaders like the Borask will still remain king. There's no doubt, however, this is going to be a powerful premium tank, and if you want to get your hands on it, you can either get them inside some kind of engineering drop in the new WT, the Waffenträger event, which is going to be starting today, or alternatively, I think it's probably going to end up being available in the shop as well. And so, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, that was it for me today with my full tank review of the ASTRON Rex. I really hope you enjoyed it, or it was just useful for you. If it was, give the video a thumbs up. If you hated it, however, give it a thumbs down. And let me know what you think about the bizarre ASTRON Rex in the comments down below. Do you think that it looks completely overpowered? Do you think that it looks about right? Does this look like the dream tank for you and you're going to pick one up as quickly as you can? Or does it look like a bit of a weirdo and you'd rather stick to the tanks you already have? And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic and hopefully I'll see you soon.